Imagine you're on a peaceful weekend getaway with friends, far from the noise of the city. The sky is painted in the soft hues of sunset, and the air is filled with the tranquil sounds of nature. But in an instant, that serenity shatters as something beyond comprehension reveals itself. What starts as an ordinary evening by the pool quickly descends into a nightmare that defies explanation. In today's story, we dive deep into a true, chilling experience where the unknown comes terrifyingly close. This is not a story for the faint of heart, and the details you are about to hear will leave you questioning the reality you thought you knew. If you're a fan of real-life paranormal encounters, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to Sinister Stories, and share this video with anyone who dares to confront the darkest corners of the supernatural. Now, let's take a deep breath as we step into the unsettling experience of two friends who came face to face with something not from this world. It was a typical afternoon in a remote countryside estate. My family often rented the place for weekends, a secluded property far from the city's lights and sounds. This particular evening fell no different, the air warm, the sky turning shades of orange and pink as the sun dipped behind the hills. I was with my friend in the pool, the stillness of the water reflecting the calm we felt, at least for the moment. We chatted lazily about our latest gaming adventures, the Eurobattle.net tournaments we'd spend hours playing. Inside the house, the adults were sleeping off a long day of drinking, leaving us alone outside to enjoy the peaceful quiet. But that peace wouldn't last. Something in the air shifted, a subtle, almost imperceptible change that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. It started with the stillness, the kind of silence that feels unnatural, like the world is holding its breath. The usual sounds of the forest, the rustle of leaves in the wind, the distant chirping of crickets, all faded into nothing. The air grew heavy, thick with an unspoken tension. It felt as if we were being watched, though by what, I couldn't say. Then it appeared. At first, it was just a light, small, distant, flickering above the treetops. It could have been a plane, a trick of the setting sun's light, or perhaps just my imagination. But as it moved, weaving in and out of the trees with an eerie fluidity, we knew this was no ordinary light. It darted erratically, faster than any human could move, and there was something about its movement that felt wrong. No rhythm, no purpose, just a chaotic, random pattern that defied logic. My friend was the first to speak, his voice barely a whisper. "Do you see that?" I nodded, too stunned to respond. The light wasn't just moving, it was changing. Its colors shifted unpredictably, from white to red to blue, pulsating like a heartbeat. The longer we watched, the more it felt like the light was alive, aware of us in some unsettling, incomprehensible way. We stood frozen, unable to look away, as the light seemed to play with us, hovering and darting just out of reach, like a predator toying with its prey. The air grew colder, a sharp contrast to the warmth of the evening, and with it came an overwhelming sense of dread. Something was terribly, terribly wrong. Without warning, the light changed direction, heading straight for us. The setting was deceptively tranquil, a countryside estate nestled in the rolling hills, surrounded by an endless stretch of dense, untamed forest. It was the kind of place where time seemed to slow down, where the sounds of the city felt like a distant memory. This property, isolated and quiet, had become a favorite escape for my family, a sanctuary from the grind of everyday life. The old house at the center of the estate was charming in a rustic way, its weathered stone walls and creaky wooden floors giving it a sense of age, as if it had been standing there for centuries, watching silently as generations came and went. But that evening, as the last rays of sunlight faded into dusk, there was something different in the air, something unsettling beneath the peaceful facade. The estate's isolation, once comforting, now felt ominous, like we were cut off from the rest of the world, trapped in a place where no one could hear us if we screamed. The vast, darkening forest beyond the pool seemed to close in, the trees standing tall like silent sentinels, their branches twisting and reaching out as if they held dark secrets. It was as though the place itself was alive, breathing, waiting. I remember standing in the pool, the water cold against my skin, as I looked out over the landscape. Just below the pool, a small, overgrown football field stretched out, leading to the edge of the tree line. Beyond that was a sea of darkness. Trees and more trees, disappearing into the horizon, a wilderness that seemed impenetrable. The wind had picked up slightly, rustling the leaves, but even that seemed wrong. The wind carried with it an uneasy chill, whispering through the branches like voices in the dark. It was the kind of chill that crawls up your spine and nestles deep in your bones. The house, normally a place of warmth and laughter, had taken on a different atmosphere. Inside, the adults lay unconscious from too much alcohol, their snores barely audible through the thick stone walls. It felt like we were completely alone, just my friend and I, suspended in this eerie quiet, as though the world outside had forgotten us. The estate was perched on a hill, giving us an expansive view of the surrounding valley, but that view now seemed more like a prison, with no escape in sight. As the light appeared over the trees, its glow was subtle at first, barely noticeable against the darkening sky. But as it danced erratically above the forest canopy, it became impossible to ignore. The stillness of the evening was shattered, replaced by a creeping sense of dread. The light moved in ways no natural phenomenon could. It didn't just float or glide. It zigzagged sharply, as if scanning the area, searching. Each erratic movement felt deliberate, like it was alive and aware of us. My heart raced as I stared at it, feeling that same overwhelming sensation of being watched. The wind seemed to die down entirely, leaving only an oppressive silence that pressed in on us from all sides. The trees stopped their restless swaying, as if they too were holding their breath, waiting. The darkness around the estate grew thicker, more suffocating, and the air felt heavier, like the atmosphere was charged with something unseen. The light, now brighter and more erratic, cast strange, twisted shadows that flickered across the field and the trees. It was no longer just a light. It was a presence, something otherworldly that didn't belong here. My friend and I exchanged nervous glances, the unspoken fear between us hanging in the air. Whatever this thing was, it was getting closer, its movements faster, more unpredictable. The estate, once a peaceful retreat, now felt like a trap, and there was nowhere to run. It started subtly, as if the world around us was teasing with hints of the unknown, playing a cruel game that neither my friend nor I were ready to understand. The light, at first distant and almost ignorable, began to take on an unsettling presence. It wasn't just the way it moved, erratic, unpredictable. It was the way it made everything around us feel wrong. The quiet that had settled over the estate earlier wasn't just a silence. It was an absence. An absence of life, of sound, of normalcy. The wind had died. The rustling leaves no longer whispered in the dark. Even the faint hum of insects that typically filled the evening air had vanished, leaving behind a void that pressed down on us, heavy and suffocating. As the light flickered and danced above the treetops, a chill settled over the estate. The warm summer evening had turned unnaturally cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand on end. My breath caught in my throat as the temperature around us seemed to drop suddenly, the water in the pool no longer refreshing but icy, numbing. I glanced at my friend, who was just as motionless, eyes locked on the strange glow in the distance. His expression mirrored mine, confusion giving way to fear. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. Then came the sounds, or rather, the lack of them. It was as if the world had decided to stop, to hold its breath, and wait for whatever was coming. There were no distant bird calls, no rustling of leaves, nothing. Just an oppressive, unnatural silence. But within that silence, there was something else, something I couldn't quite place. A low hum, barely audible, vibrating in the air around us. It wasn't coming from the light, but it seemed connected to it, like a distant engine revving in a place that shouldn't exist. The hum crawled under my skin, vibrating in my bones, making my head ache in a way that was hard to describe. The light, which had once seemed so far away, was now impossibly close. It wasn't just above the trees anymore. It was moving toward us, zigzagging with a speed and precision that made my stomach churn. Each movement was wrong, unnatural, as if the object or whatever it was defying the laws of physics, defying everything I thought I knew about the world. I could feel my pulse quicken, my heart thudding heavily in my chest, as the light darted from one side of the trees to the other, growing larger, brighter, more menacing. And then, the feeling of being watched intensified. It wasn't just a sense of paranoia. It was something far more primal, something instinctive. Every fiber of my being screamed that we were not alone, that this light was more than just a distant phenomenon. It was aware of us. It was observing us. The sensation was so strong, so visceral, that I found myself scanning the darkness, expecting to see eyes peering out from the shadows. But there was nothing. Nothing but the light. And yet I knew we were being studied, analyzed, as if we were prey, and this thing was deciding what to do next. The water in the pool rippled slightly, though there was no breeze to disturb it. I could feel the change in the air. It was electric, charged with something I couldn't see, but could feel all around me. The tension was unbearable, a weight pressing down on my chest, making it difficult to breathe. My skin prickled with the sensation of being touched by invisible fingers, as if the very atmosphere around us was alive, reaching out, testing, probing. It was as though the world itself had shifted, tilting ever so slightly into the realm of the unnatural, and we were caught in the middle of it. Without warning, the light flickered again, this time closer, more erratic in its movements. It hovered above the pool, casting an eerie glow across the surface of the water, illuminating our surroundings in strange, warped shadows. The trees seemed to stretch toward us, their gnarled branches twisting in unnatural ways under the light. The object was no longer just a distant curiosity. It was here, with us, and it wasn't leaving. I turned to my friend, my voice barely a whisper. "Do you feel that?" He nodded, his face pale, eyes wide with a fear I'd never seen before. Neither of us dared to move, dared to speak louder. The light pulsed, its colors shifting again, from white to blue, then to a deep, menacing red. With each change, the hum in the air grew louder, more intense, vibrating through the water and into our bodies. We were frozen, locked in place by the sheer terror of the unknown, of this thing that had intruded on our reality. Suddenly, the light shot upward, disappearing behind the treetops for just a moment. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived, because in the next instant, it returned, faster and closer than before, hovering just meters above us. There was no escaping it now. In that moment, time seemed to stretch, elongating every second into an eternity of indecision and terror. My heart pounded in my chest, the sound of my own pulse deafening in my ears as the object hung ominously above us, suspended in the air like a silent predator. The metallic, fluid-like surface of the object shimmered in the dim light, pulsating with an eerie glow that seemed to pulse in time with my racing heartbeat. My body felt cold, paralyzed by the weight of a decision that pressed heavily on my mind. Should we run, hide, or stay frozen and hope it would leave us alone? Fear clawed at my insides, a primal instinct screaming at me to get away, to flee from this thing that clearly did not belong in our world. But another part of me, the part fueled by curiosity, by the inexplicable need to understand, held me in place. What was this object? Why was it here? And more terrifyingly, why had it chosen to come so close to us? My friend, standing just beside me, looked equally torn. His face was pale, his eyes wide with the same conflicting emotions I felt. The air between us was thick with tension, the silence stretching unbearably. "I think we should leave," my friend finally whispered, his voice barely audible over the suffocating quiet. But leaving didn't seem like an option anymore. The object hovered just a few meters above us, too close for comfort, its strange, liquid-like surface undulating as though it was alive, watching us, calculating. Every muscle in my body tensed, ready to bolt, but there was nowhere to go. The pool stretched out around us like a glassy barrier, trapping us in its cold embrace. Beyond the pool, the dark forest loomed, offering no real refuge. We were exposed, vulnerable, with no cover from whatever this thing was. It was then that I realized, if we ran, it might follow. It had moved with such terrifying speed before, crossing the distance in a matter of seconds. Running might provoke it, make us appear like prey to be hunted, but staying felt equally dangerous. We were already within its grasp, already subject to its silent scrutiny. The longer we stood there, the more it seemed to press down on us, like a hunter studying its next move, waiting for us to make the wrong decision. My breath came in short, shallow gasps, and my skin prickled with the sensation of being observed from all sides. I looked at my friend, hoping for some sign of resolve, but he was as frozen as I was, his eyes darting between the object and the dark forest beyond. The conflict within both of us was palpable, a battle between survival instinct and the paralyzing grip of the unknown. We had no way of knowing what would happen next, no way of predicting the intentions of this silent, hovering menace. My mind raced with possibilities. Could it be an alien? A government experiment gone wrong? Something far darker and more inexplicable? A sudden rush of adrenaline surged through me, breaking the paralysis for just a moment. "We have to do something," I whispered, though I wasn't sure what. Running seemed futile, but standing still seemed like an invitation for disaster. The object trembled slightly, as if reacting to my sudden movement, and I felt a jolt of panic shoot through me. It was aware of us. Fully aware. My friend's voice was shaky, barely controlled. Maybe we should see what it wants. If it wanted to hurt us, it would have already, right? His words hung in the air, but neither of us believed them. There was no logic to this situation, no reasoning with something that defied all explanation. But he was right in one sense. If it had wanted to harm us, it could have done so in an instant. Yet here it was lingering, watching. Was it waiting for us to make the next move? The tension was unbearable. Every second stretched, as if time itself was bending under the weight of the moment. My mind screamed to act, to do something, anything, but my body refused to comply. The air around us felt charged, buzzing with invisible energy, as if the object was drawing power from the atmosphere itself. My skin tingled with the sensation of static electricity, tiny pinpricks dancing across my arms and legs. The object hovered, its surface shifting and shimmering, as if waiting for us to make a decision. My thoughts raced, weighing the risks of action against the terror of inaction. Running could provoke it, but staying might invite something far worse. My legs trembled with the effort to stay rooted in place, my muscles screaming to move, to flee from this nightmare. I glanced at my friend, my eyes pleading for him to make the choice, to be the one to break the unbearable silence. But before either of us could act, the object shifted again. It trembled, vibrating with a strange intensity, and a low hum filled the air around us. The sound wasn't loud, but it was deep, reverberating through my bones, vibrating the water in the pool, making the surface ripple in eerie patterns. The sensation was both terrifying and mesmerizing, as if the object was preparing for something neither of us could anticipate. In that moment we knew, whatever decision we made, we were no longer in control. The moment we had dreaded finally came. The object, now hovering just above the pool, seemed to pulse with an energy that was both mesmerizing and terrifying. Its metallic surface rippled like liquid, reflecting the faint moonlight, and those thousands of tiny lights embedded within it flickered, almost like they were watching us, blinking, observing, calculating. The low hum that had filled the air before grew louder, vibrating through the water, through the ground beneath our feet, and deep into our bones. It wasn't just a sound, it was a feeling, an unsettling vibration that resonated with something primal inside us. Fear gripped us, tightening like a vice around our chests. Suddenly, the object moved, not in the slow, erratic pattern we had witnessed before, but with a deliberate swiftness that made my stomach drop. It darted downward, just inches from the surface of the water, casting an eerie glow that bathed everything around us in a sickly, unnatural light. The pool water shimmered under the glow, but something about it seemed wrong. It was too still, too reflective, like a mirror showing us not just the surface, but something deeper, something hidden beneath. I took a step back instinctively, pulling away from the water's edge, but my legs felt heavy, as though the atmosphere around us was pressing down, pinning us in place. My friend grabbed my arm, his grip tight with fear, his eyes wide as he stared at the object, unable to look away. His voice was barely more than a whisper. "What is that thing?" I didn't have an answer. How could I? There were no words to describe what was unfolding in front of us. This wasn't something from this world. It couldn't be. The object floated there, silent and ominous, its light flickering and pulsing in a way that felt almost alive, as if it were breathing, waiting. My breath caught in my throat as the lights on its surface shifted again. This time, they changed from soft white to deep, blood red, and with that change came an overwhelming sense of dread, a cold wave of terror that washed over me. It was then that I noticed the water. The pool, which had been still, began to bubble, small ripples forming around the edges, growing larger and more frantic. It wasn't just the bubbling that unsettled me, though. It was the temperature. I could feel it from where I stood. The water was getting warmer, unnaturally so. Steam began to rise from the surface, curling up into the cold night air, and with it came the unmistakable scent of something burning, something metallic. I could taste it on the back of my tongue, a sharp, acrid flavor that made me feel sick. The object hovered closer to the water, and as it did, the bubbling intensified. The water churned violently now, splashing against the sides of the pool as though something beneath the surface was thrashing, struggling to break free. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, but there was no logic to it, no explanation. The water surface wasn't just reacting to the object, it was being manipulated, controlled. The bubbles grew larger, almost as if the pool was boiling, and with each burst, a strange sensation crawled across my skin. It felt like tiny needles, pricking my arms and legs, leaving a tingling, almost burning sensation in their wake. I looked down at my skin, expecting to see some kind of rash or reaction, but there was nothing. Just the unmistakable feeling of something crawling beneath the surface of my flesh. My heart pounded in my chest, panic rising as I tried to brush it off, but the sensation only grew stronger. It wasn't just on my skin, it was inside me, as if the very air around us had been charged with some kind of energy that was now seeping into my body, embedding itself into my nerves. My friend gasped beside me, clutching his arm as though he felt it too. His eyes were wide with fear, his breath coming in short, sharp bursts. What the hell is happening? Before I could respond, the object trembled again, this time more violently. The lights on its surface flickered rapidly, and the low hum grew into a deep, resonating pulse that seemed to vibrate through the entire estate. The ground beneath us shook, sending ripples across the pool, and for a split second, I thought the entire world was about to collapse under the weight of whatever was happening. The lights on the object flashed once more, and then, without warning, it shot upward, straight into the sky, disappearing into the darkness as quickly as it had come. But the terror didn't leave with it. The water in the pool continued to churn, bubbles rising and bursting, and that tingling sensation lingered, like the remnants of a nightmare that refused to let go. The air around us was still thick, heavy with the scent of burning metal, and the ground beneath my feet felt unstable, as though the earth itself was trembling with the aftershocks of something far beyond our understanding. For a moment, we just stood there, frozen in place, staring at the sky where the object had vanished. My mind was racing, my body numb with shock. It was over, but the terror remained. The pool was still bubbling, the steam rising in thick clouds, and the sensation of needles pricking my skin hadn't faded. It clung to me, a reminder that what had just happened was real, that something had come close, too close, and we had no idea why. Finally, my friend broke the silence, his voice trembling. "Did you feel that? It wasn't just in the water. It was inside us." I nodded, unable to speak. The object was gone, but its presence lingered, haunting the very air we breathed. Whatever it had been, whatever it had wanted, we had been touched by it, changed by it. And deep down, I knew that this wouldn't be the last time it would return. The silence that followed the object's sudden departure was deafening, but it wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the kind of silence that presses against your chest, suffocating, laden with the weight of something unspeakable. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened, but there were no answers. Only questions, and a gnawing fear that whatever that thing was, it had seen us, studied us, and left something behind. The pool was still bubbling slightly, steam curling up from the surface in lazy spirals, as if the water itself was struggling to return to normal, but the air remained heavy, thick with an unseen presence that refused to dissipate. My skin still tingled with that strange sensation, the pricking of invisible needles that had started when the object appeared. I rubbed my arms, trying to shake off the feeling, but it wouldn't go away. It felt deeper than just a surface irritation. It was inside me, crawling through my veins, a foreign sensation that I couldn't escape. I looked at my friend, and I could see the same fear reflected in his eyes. He was rubbing his arms too, his face pale, his breath coming in shallow gasps. "What just happened?" he whispered, his voice barely audible over the oppressive quiet. Before I could answer, I noticed something strange about the pool. The water, though still bubbling slightly, had taken on a peculiar sheen. The surface shimmered unnaturally, reflecting the dim light in ways that didn't seem right. It wasn't just water anymore. There was something else in it, something that had been left behind by the object. As I stared, mesmerized and horrified, I saw it. Tiny, almost microscopic particles swirling beneath the surface, glowing faintly, like embers burning under the water. They pulsed in rhythm, as if alive, moving with purpose. A sickening realization washed over me. Whatever the object had been, it had left something behind in the pool, something that wasn't supposed to be there. My heart raced as I stepped closer to the edge, drawn in by the strange glow. The particles, shimmering and pulsating, seemed to react to my presence, their movements growing more frantic, more intense. It was as if they were aware of me, just like the object had been. Then it hit me. These particles weren't just floating aimlessly. They were spreading. Slowly, but surely, they were seeping into the water, dispersing, multiplying. And with that realization came a surge of panic. Had we been exposed to something dangerous? Had the object infected the water, the air, us? My mind flooded with terrifying possibilities. What if these particles weren't harmless? What if they were something far more sinister? My skin crawled at the thought, the tingling sensation intensifying, as if the particles were already inside me, working their way through my system, changing me from the inside out. "We need to get out of here," I said, my voice trembling. "Now." But even as I spoke, I knew it was too late. The object may have left, but the damage was already done. The tingling in my skin had grown unbearable, like tiny sparks of electricity dancing just beneath the surface, and my friend was clutching his chest, his face contorted in pain. "I feel strange," he muttered, his voice strained, "like something's crawling inside me." Panic surged through me, and I felt an overwhelming urge to run, to get as far away from this place as possible. But where could we go? We had already been exposed. Whatever this thing was, it had already touched us, changed us. There was no escaping it now. Suddenly, a sharp pain shot through my head, blinding me for a moment. It was like a flash of white-hot light, burning through my skull. I stumbled back, clutching my temples, and as the pain subsided, I saw something that chilled me to the core. It was a vision, brief but vivid, a glimpse of something otherworldly, a place that didn't belong in our world. Dark, cold, vast, and filled with shapes I couldn't comprehend, creatures that defied logic. I felt their presence, their gaze, as though they were watching me from beyond, waiting for something. The vision faded as quickly as it had come, but the terror it left behind was overwhelming. I gasped for breath, my heart hammering in my chest. "Did you see that?" I asked my friend, but he was staring blankly ahead, his eyes glazed over, as if in a trance. He didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge me. Something was wrong. terribly wrong. I shook him, trying to snap him out of it, but he remained unresponsive, his body rigid, his eyes fixed on the shimmering water. And then, slowly, he turned to me. But the person I knew wasn't there anymore. His face was slack, his expression blank, but his eyes were glowing. Faintly, but unmistakably. The same eerie light that had flickered on the object was now reflected in his gaze, as though he had absorbed whatever it was the object had left behind. My blood turned to ice. This wasn't just a lingering effect of the encounter. Something had changed inside him, inside both of us. The particles, the energy, the presence. It was still here, within us. The revelation hit me like a sledgehammer. We hadn't just been touched by the object. We had been marked by it. And whatever it wasn't done with us yet. The air around us grew colder, the oppressive silence heavier, and I realized, with a growing sense of dread, that this was just the beginning. The object had left, but it hadn't gone far. It was still watching, still waiting. And now, we were no longer just witnesses to the supernatural. We were part of it. The night was still, but nothing felt the same. The estate, once a place of peace and escape, now seemed to pulse with a malevolent presence. The object had vanished, but the air remained thick with its lingering energy, as if the space it once occupied was now filled with a residue that would never fully dissipate. My friend's eyes, glowing faintly with that otherworldly light, stared back at me, but I could no longer recognize him. It was as if something else had taken root inside him, something foreign and unknowable. Fear gnawed at my insides, twisting my gut into knots as I tried to process what had just happened. The bubbling in the pool had slowed, but the water still shimmered unnaturally, its surface reflecting strange patterns in the moonlight. I couldn't shake the feeling that the pool had become tainted, transformed into something dangerous and alive. Every ripple, every shimmer, seemed to carry the weight of the unknown, as though the water itself had become a portal to something far more sinister. I took a cautious step back, my heart racing, every instinct in my body screaming at me to leave this place, to run and never look back. But it wasn't that simple. Something had changed, something fundamental, not just in the estate, but in us. We had been touched by the object, marked by its presence, and there was no undoing it. My skin still tingled with that electric, pricking sensation, as though the particles left behind by the object had embedded themselves deep within my flesh, altering me in ways I couldn't yet understand. The tingling wasn't just physical. It was in my mind, crawling beneath my thoughts, whispering dark things I didn't want to hear. It felt like an invasion, a slow, creeping transformation that was happening from the inside out. I glanced at my friend, hoping for some sign that he was still himself, but his expression remained blank, his eyes vacant, glowing softly with that unsettling light. "We need to get help," I muttered, though I wasn't sure who could help us now, who would believe what we had just witnessed, who would understand the terror we had just experienced. My voice trembled as I spoke, but my friend didn't respond. He didn't even seem to register that I had said anything. The silence between us stretched on, oppressive and unnatural. It was as if we were standing on the edge of two worlds, one real, one far beyond our comprehension, and the line between them was beginning to blur. The estate around us, with its creaky old house and its once familiar surroundings, now felt alien, as though it had shifted into a different reality, one where the rules of our world no longer applied. Shadows seemed to move in the corners of my vision, twisting and distorting, but every time I turned to look, they were gone. I knew we couldn't stay there. The estate was no longer safe, if it ever had been. Whatever had come from the object had left a mark, and I feared it wasn't finished with us yet. The thought sent a fresh wave of terror through me, cold and paralyzing. If we left, would it follow us? Or worse, had we already carried part of it with us? The tingling in my skin, the visions, the way my friend's eyes glowed, it all pointed to one horrifying conclusion. We weren't the same anymore. "We have to leave," I said again, more firmly this time, trying to rouse my friend from his trance. But again, he didn't respond. His glowing eyes were fixed on the pool, his expression unreadable, as though he were staring into the abyss of something I couldn't see. Panic surged in my chest. "Come on, we can't stay here." I grabbed his arm, shaking him hard, but he barely reacted. His skin was cold, and I could feel the faint vibration beneath his flesh, like something inside him was humming with that same energy the object had left behind. The realization hit me hard. I might already be too late. My friend was no longer himself, no longer fully human. Whatever the object had done, whatever it had left behind, it was inside him now, altering him from within. And maybe, just maybe, it was inside me too. I let go of his arm, stepping back in horror, my mind reeling. This wasn't just a close encounter. It was an infection, an invasion. The object had touched us, marked us, and now it was changing us in ways we couldn't comprehend. The pool, the estate, everything around us felt like part of some larger, incomprehensible design, a puzzle we were too small to understand. But the pieces were falling into place, and the picture they were forming was one of terror. Suddenly, my friend turned toward me, his face still blank, but his eyes, those glowing, eerie eyes, locked onto mine. For the first time since the object disappeared, he spoke, his voice hollow, distant. "It's not over." A chill ran down my spine. The words hung in the air, heavy with a meaning I didn't want to understand. But deep down, I knew he was right. Whatever had happened that night, whatever had touched us, it wasn't finished. The object may have left, but the terror it brought wasn't gone. It had simply taken root, waiting, watching. I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. The shadows around us seemed to close in, the darkness growing thicker, more oppressive. I could feel it, something lurking just beyond the edge of sight, something that had been awakened by the object's presence. The estate, the pool, my friend, none of it felt real anymore. We were standing on the precipice of something far darker than we had ever imagined, and there was no going back. With one last look at my friend, I turned and ran, my feet pounding against the earth as I fled into the night. I didn't know where I was going, or if I could even escape what had been set in motion. But I knew one thing for certain. The object had left its mark on us, and the terror wasn't over. It had only just begun. Days had passed since that night, but the events remained etched in my mind, replaying like a broken record. No matter how much I tried to push the memories away, they clung to me, seeping into my thoughts, invading my dreams. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the object, its metallic, rippling surface, the eerie glow of those thousands of tiny lights, and felt the pricking sensation on my skin again, as if invisible needles were still buried deep beneath the surface. But the most haunting image of all was my friend, his vacant stare, and the glow that had replaced the humanity in his eyes. I had left the estate that night, running through the dark forest without looking back, but even as I fled, I knew it wasn't over. The object had disappeared into the sky, but I could still feel its presence, hovering just beyond the edges of reality, watching, waiting. And whatever it had left behind in us, in me, was growing. I could feel it in every breath, in every heartbeat, a low hum that vibrated through my body, subtly at first, but now unmistakable. It was as if my entire being had been altered, shifted by an energy that didn't belong to this world. I returned to the city, hoping the noise and the lights would drown out the memories, but instead, they only amplified my sense of isolation. Everything felt different now, off-kilter, as though the very fabric of reality had been twisted in the wake of that encounter. I watched people go about their daily lives, unaware of the dark truth that lurked just beyond their understanding. They had no idea how close they were to the edge, how fragile the barrier between our world and something far more sinister truly was. Sleep offered no escape. Each night, the dreams came, vivid, relentless. I was back at the estate, standing by the pool, the water still bubbling, the steam rising into the cold night air. But in the dreams, the object didn't disappear. It hovered there, close enough to touch, its lights flickering, calling to me. And every time, I reached out, my fingers trembling as they brushed against its surface. The instant I made contact, a surge of energy rushed through me, burning, overwhelming, until I woke up drenched in sweat, gasping for air, my heart racing with a terror I couldn't shake. But the worst part wasn't the dreams, it was the changes. At first, they were subtle. A slight distortion in my vision, a faint ringing in my ears, as if the world around me was off by just a fraction of a second. But then the sensations grew stronger. My skin, once only tingling, now burned with the same sensation I had felt by the pool, as though something beneath the surface was trying to push its way out. I tried to ignore it, to convince myself that it was just anxiety, stress, my mind playing tricks on me after such a traumatic event. But deep down, I knew better. The truth was impossible to ignore. I had been marked. The object hadn't just observed us that night. It had left a part of itself behind. A piece of its energy, its presence, was now inside me, changing me, molding me into something I couldn't understand. My reflection in the mirror became unfamiliar, my eyes dull, lifeless. The glow that had overtaken my friend's eyes had not yet appeared in mine, but I knew it was only a matter of time. I could feel it, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the moment to reveal itself. I tried to reach out to my friend, desperate to know if he was experiencing the same transformation, but he had disappeared. No one had seen him since the night at the estate. His phone was disconnected, his social media accounts wiped clean, as if he had never existed. I searched for him, but each lead ended in a dead end, and with every failed attempt, the dread inside me grew. Had the object taken him, or had he surrendered to whatever was happening to him, accepting the changes while I still fought against them? The isolation was suffocating. No one could understand what I had been through, what I was going through. I couldn't tell anyone the truth. They would think I was crazy, and maybe I was. Maybe the object had done more than just change me physically. Maybe it had shattered my mind, leaving me trapped in this nightmare while the rest of the world carried on, blissfully unaware. The longer I kept silent, the more the fear festered inside me, twisting into something darker, something that whispered in the back of my mind, "You are no longer human." It was on a particularly restless night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, that I felt it, the unmistakable presence of the object, watching me from somewhere I couldn't see. The sensation was so strong, so immediate, that I sat up, heart pounding, my skin crawling with that now familiar tingling. I knew it was there, just beyond the walls of my apartment, waiting for me to acknowledge it. And in that moment, I realized that I couldn't escape it. The object had left its mark, and it wasn't going to leave me alone, ever. I stood by the window, staring out into the empty street below. The world was quiet, peaceful, but it felt like a lie. There was nothing peaceful about what was happening to me, about what had happened that night at the estate. I wasn't the same person anymore, and I never would be. The object had taken something from me, my sense of self, my humanity, and replaced it with something far darker, something I couldn't understand. As I stood there, the hum returned, low and insistent, vibrating through my bones. It was then that I realized the object hadn't left me at all. It was inside me, and it always had been. And no matter how far I ran, no matter how hard I tried to fight it, the transformation was inevitable. The object had marked me as its own, and whatever it had planned, it was only just beginning.